What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Jimmy James 59, and I have a build order video for you that's a little bit longer because it's an idea I kind of came across that was very much inspired by some other things I've seen out in the community, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it and working through it with you all. So strap in, get your popcorn ready, and let's go ahead and dive into this. Now, I want to give credit to other people, and especially I want to give credit to somebody who I consider a friend of the channel and who's done a lot of work advocating for the Mongol steppe lancer. And that's a guy, he's got a YouTube channel on here, goes by Morley Games. Highly encourage you check him out. He puts a lot of great build orders out, a lot of great thought and content as well. And he has popularized something that he refers to as the Morley Rush, and it is essentially a fast castle build to get steppe lancers out in the field as fast as possible that's taking advantage of that Mongol hunt bonus. And what's so cool about the Morley Rush is that it kind of zigs in a different direction than a lot of the ways that people traditionally use the Mongol hunt bonus to get up to achieve a power spike. Most people will try to get up to the feudal age as fast as possible, 17, 18 pop. And what Morley does in the Morley Rush is he goes for like a 23+2 uptime, and he's trying to use that Mongol hunt bonus and luring in all of his deer to get the steppe lancer power spike as fast as possible. And the steppe lancer for Mongols, it's a great unit. Mongols get 30% more HP. It's a unit that has gotten a lot of buffs over the past year to its damage output, right? Getting an extra attack and also the firing rate being improved as well. And it also has inherently one extra range, so it can really tear through walls. You can kind of micro down typical counter units like spearmen, and you can close the gap with archers, and having that extra HP really helps. Now, what I want to do in this video is do a variation on the Morley Rush here, right? And you can call it the Jimmy variation if you want to use maybe more like chess terminology, right? I like to call it the Bloodlines Rush because that's what we're doing, in that, like the Morley Rush, we're going to not try to go up to the feudal age as fast as possible. But unlike the Morley Rush, we are going to play a feudal age, and in fact, I would encourage you, if you can, to play an extended feudal age for reasons I'll talk about. And we're going to instantly queue up bloodlines. That's the plan. So we're going to talk about exactly how we're going to do that. But what I want to talk about are the reasons that we're going to do that first. And I'm just going to fast forward this through a little bit. I'll put the build up on the screen or something, the basic idea of it. But really what we're doing right here is that you're doing a typical 19 pop scout rush, right? I'll slow it down here. You can see, right, we're getting up with basically no idle time, 19 pop, easy day. And we're doing a 19 pop scout rush, which is still pretty fast for most civs, not necessarily fast for the Mongols. And we're going to use our extra food that we get because we took in all that hunt so quickly. We're going to use that to afford bloodlines. And the way that we're going to get the bloodlines, as you can see, to get loom, we have only 50 gold. And the way we're going to do that here is we are going to send 2 villagers out to gold, right? Now, I want to talk about then why we are doing this essentially and what advantage it's going to give over the Morley Rush, right? And one of the weaknesses of the Morley Rush is that you cede a lot of map control. Typically, the Morley Rush gets up to Castle Age at about the 14-minute mark, and that's where you can start steppe lancer production. If you add in a drush, which is a really interesting sort of wrinkle that Morley has done, that pushes you up to maybe about 15 minutes, right? You go ahead, check on our opponent, see what he's doing. He's up to the next age, so pretty interesting from him right there. He's playing a bit more passive as the Byzantines. Not that uncommon. We're just waiting for a little bit of wood to come in. Perfect, no big deal. And we're getting the stable up, right? Because what we want to do with this is that we don't want to give up map control, right? The idea of this build is that we take map control and we want to use this Bloodlines power spike to create a more valuable army than our opponent can get to, right? And so that's the idea. The idea is probably still to really play into something like Steppe Lancers. I guess you don't have to, but that's the idea. And if you take a look, right, the purpose of this build, you queue up 3 scouts and bloodlines instantly, and we're just going to wait for all that to come in. So let me just fast forward a little bit, right? Scouts are coming out in the field. Again, you know, the basic sort of principles of the build are, we've already kind of kept in mind. And you can see bloodlines is on the way, because I want to give you a sense of the timing here, right? And we'll go ahead and go back to normal speed. So it's a little over 12 minutes. Boom. Now we have this army, 260 HP, right? A big increase. Bloodlines is basically giving you about 40% more HP on your scouts, right? And so it's a pretty massive upgrade. And you can see, right, this villager, she got a little froggy, you know, just she wanted it. She wanted to see, you know, the power of bloodline. She even got a little bit of a hit in for herself. She just couldn't help herself. And you can see, right, we're able to sustain scout production in this build, right? We're going to keep our scout production going on. This game was played at about a 1300 elo level, so the idle CC time, all that kind of thing, is definitely not going to be perfect. So again, that's the level that we're at here. And we're able to keep scout production going on pretty consistently. And this is what we want to do here, right? And so I talked about for a moment the some of the weaknesses, not weaknesses, but I mean, every build in Age of Empires has some weaknesses. And so some of the things that are challenges in the Morley Rush, right? Giving up map control, waiting to get units out in the field. And I want to talk about why we would adopt this particular variation of the Morley Rush, because I want to give Morley a lot of credit for inspiring this, right? And one of the reasons you're going to see right here, it's really easy for us to fight against spearmen now, right? 2 spearmen out in the field, no problem for our units. We still have the lion's share of our HP, right? So we can take those really efficient fights. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Bloodlines power spike is going to hit sooner than that Steppe Lancer power spike. It's true that it's only a feudal age power spike, but it's actually a very important one. The second reason that you might want to go for the Bloodlines Rush is that the setup for it, keeping those 2 villagers on gold, if you want to keep them there, it might be a bit easier, right? We're using this to wall up our base, but you might want to add in an archery range and get to scouts with bloodlines plus archers with fletching. Could be very powerful. Scouts with bloodlines and archers with fletching is about as population efficient of a feudal army as you can have. And I didn't do it in this game, but you can see, right, again, if you delay a little bit of the walls, right, you can see we're getting our blacksmith down right here, right? If you don't want to wall up quite as much and you feel a little bit more secure, maybe you want a quick wall, you're going to have the wood. You can go ahead and take care of that, right? And you can go get to basically the most population efficient feudal army that you could really possibly have in the game, right? And so you can kind of, I would also say the other reason, right, that's pretty advantageous is, let's say that you scout out your opponent, right, and he's walled. It's a lot easier to bail on this scout rush if you decide you want to go archers instead. It's actually a lot easier to just go ahead and make that transition. And so this opening gives you a bit of flexibility as our opponent is going to, lure in some lions, and he's going for, again, you sometimes see this with Byzantines, a really defensive playstyle. He just wants to get up to Castle Age with some economy, and he's going to try and pressure us that way. He probably has a sense that Steppe Lancers are inbound, and now that's what I want to talk about, right? Because one of the advantages of the Jimmy variation is that if you play a more extended feudal age, right? As you can see that we're doing that here. We've made a lot of scouts. We play this more extended feudal age, we're going to have a bigger economy upon getting up to the Castle Age. And that helps us in a lot of ways, right? One of the advantages of the traditional Morley Rush is that theoretically you can get some of your Castle Age upgrades quicker. But the downside, though, is that in a traditional Morley Rush, you go up on such low eco that you usually can't do that immediately. And so, often in the Morley Rush, you might see in the opening just one stable Steppe Lancer production, for instance, right? It becomes really hard to afford the resources to be able to go for like 2 stable production. Again, you're just going up so fast. Playing a little bit more extended, right? And getting your eco going so that we have all of our upgrades, and we're accomplishing that, allows us to, when we get to Castle Age, to play a lot more units out in the field. We can go for something like 3 stable production. Now there's another advantage to the Jimmy variation, and that's that it really allows you to take advantage of the Mongol light cavalry as well. Remember, Steppe Lancers are getting that plus 30 HP, but also your Mongol light cav are getting that plus 30 HP as well, and that's a trash unit, and it's also an anti-monk unit. And we are very much today in a monk meta. And so even though Steppe Lancers, they can close the distance a bit better than knights, and they have that one range, you start getting Steppe Lancers converted, and especially if you have them in small numbers, it's the kind of thing, right, you really want to watch out. Being able to mix in, right, upgrade your existing scouts to light cav, or just be able to have the resources to get the light cav upgrade and mix in light cavalry with your Steppe Lancers can be a really effective tool, right? And so you can see here, right, we're up to Castle Age at a pretty decent time. Again, we made a bunch of scouts, of course, right? We have husbandry on the way. Let me see, one of these stables probably is going to have light cavalry upgrade on the way as well. So we're going to get these units upgraded. We're tracking our opponent's army, right? Our opponent wants to go 2 ranges here, right? But again, this is a great part of being able to mix in light cav, which have that 2 base pierce armor and extra HP. So we have a unit that's actually pretty resistant to archers. We're kind of forcing him back here, and we're just kind of tracking that army, keeping it out in the field. And you can see we even have the resources to get plus 2 armor, right? So again, this is the advantage of going up with a bit more economy, because we're able to afford just so much more. You can see we have a lot of wood. We could, seed more farms. I like with this build to keep the pressure on. I like with this build to go ahead and wait till this wave of farms gets reseeded to then think about putting down, say, like a town center or something else. Because the idea of this build is you're really piling on the pressure, you're sustaining pressure in the game, right, with this particular variation. We're still using this Steppe Lancer power spike, but we're really just kind of mixing it in. I really think a combined army is the best approach, and you can see, right, that we're going to be able to get in a lot of damage, and this game, should end pretty quickly here. We've really worked out a big lead for ourselves, right? So, because, the Mongols don't have a great economy. You don't have a great economy in the mid game, right? You have a good early game economy, and that's what we're taking advantage of. But in the mid game, it's a difficult place for the Mongols in the mid game to be trying to build their economy, because you just don't really have any bonuses. From my perspective, at least, the Mongols mid game, in terms of what it's good at, is really defined by your diversity of mobile military units, right? Steppe Lancers, camels. You could mix in knights, right? You can see we have a ton of gold. We could start throwing in knights into this into this army, right? We can really keep the pressure going, and then we can start to add economy behind that. Now, when it comes to the Morley Rush versus the sort of traditional one versus the Jimmy variation that plays out this way, the Jimmy variation is for me at least, I think probably has its advantages more on open maps, right, that are difficult to wall up, right? This was not a bad map for our opponent to actually try and wall up here if he were able to get there. He really wasn't able to, right? He tried to defend more with spears, and that didn't go his way. But if this guy had walled up, right, you might not want to invest in that Bloodlines. And if your opponent's playing a bit more of a defensive or a reactive playstyle, you might be better off in some cases going for that Morley Rush and getting that Castle Age unit out in the field before your opponent gets there. I also think on closed maps, but that, say, where you start with like palisade walls, like hideout, I think the Morley Rush is a really, really good strategy. I think that where you might want to go with the Jimmy variation is on some of these more open maps, like the versions of Arabia that we're seeing, maps that are a bit more difficult to wall up, situations where you want to take more, map control, that kind of thing. I think that's where I would go for the Jimmy variation. And the Jimmy variation is a build that is very much positioned between the delayed gratification of the Morley Rush, which goes for a fast castle, and the lightning fast feudal age rushes that we typically see with the Mongols that are like 17, 18 pop uptimes. Now, perhaps though the more difficult question to answer here is, well, should you get bloodlines, or should you just use those resources to keep making scouts? And I want to turn my focus to that in this next section of the video. All right, so I'm sure that this next part of the video is not everybody's cup of tea. And so if that's the case, right, just definitely hop forward to the next section. This video is timestamped, so it should be pretty easy for you to do. And I'll kind of give a quick summary at the beginning of that section of what we've done here. Now, when it comes to figuring out how valuable Bloodlines is to your rush in comparison to just continually making scouts, the only way to truly derive it is to work through the numbers, and that is exactly what we're going to do here. So bear with me, and for those of you who enjoy this kind of thing, right, get your popcorn ready, because this is a fun one. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be comparing a 19 pop scout rush if we just kept making scouts versus, right, the Jimmy variation on the Morley Rush, aka the Bloodlines Rush. And then we're going to figure out at what point, right, in the time in the game that the early Bloodlines is giving you greater value, and therefore you have a stronger army than you otherwise would have, right? So let's go ahead, right? And we're going to start off with our baseline, looking at the traditional, we're going to call it a traditional, but basically you're making scouts continuously. So you can see, right, we have scouts being made continuously. They're on the left. Our HP, 45 HP per scout, no worries. The amount of time that has elapsed in the game since you got the stable up. So when you get the stable up, that's time 0, and you already have a scout in the field because you start with one, that's 45 HP. And then every 30 seconds, we're going to add another 45 HP. This takes us to our first really interesting metric regarding durability, is that if we look at the amount of scout HP we have as a function of time, we can see that this number is continually getting lower. And the reason is that because when we start off with our stable right at time 0, we already have 45 HP, which is, like infinite value, right? And then every 30 seconds, right, we're adding another 45, but that is giving us an ever decreasing HP over time proportion. And so this would go down basically all the way till about like 1.5 if we were to take it at the limit. But the takeaway here is that the amount of scout HP you have as a function of time, if you don't research bloodlines, is actually decreasing as the game goes on, right? Something very important to keep in mind there. Now, if we can take a look at damage, right, we can see, 5 damage per unit. We're going to assume no blacksmith upgrades here, pretty clean numbers. And what I want to do is take a look at combat versus groups of scouts and archers, very common units that you're going to see in feudal age. And the reason we're not going to look at men-at-arms is because, well, that's really more part of like an opening anyways, and you tend not to see sustained men-at-arms pressure. And spearmen, I'm going to talk about that separately. Now, we're going to look at damage versus 3 scouts or 5 archers with fletching. Each of those groups do 15 damage a pop. 3 scouts do 5 damage. 5 groups of archers do 3 damage each because scouts have 2 base pierce armor. So it's a really nice comparison. We are also going to have to consider here that when units fight, they're trading HP. So we have to assume that how many scouts we have on the field are going to lose some HP. And so we're going to start off looking at light combat, assuming that basically each round, right, we're going to be losing about 9 HP off of our scouts. That's about 20%, right? So not that much, but we have to calculate in here the fact that we are actually fighting. And you can see, right, that we have our, our HP from however many scouts we have, minus, the amount of HP that's actually lost amongst them. And then we have to look at, how much damage, right, these groups are doing. And then basically, right, we can times all that by 5 because, our group of scouts, each scout's doing 5 damage each, right? So that factors in there. And you can see, right, that, as, right, our number of scouts go up, as you might expect, right, the amount of damage that we're able to get out over time is going up. And we will also look here at what we'll call heavy combat, and that's losing about half of our scout HP each round. And you can see, right, that again, we have essentially fewer scouts on the field, so to speak, because we have less HP. So we've all been in this situation, right, where we have a scout that has like 5 HP, and you really can't fight with it for very long because it's going to die a lot faster. And that's what we're trying to capture here, right? And so you can see that, under heavy combat, right, we're going to be getting a bit less damage on the field, right? About basically about a third less damage. Okay. Now, we're going to look very quickly here at the Jimmy variation, and we are going to then make some comparisons to understand at what point in the game, right, the Jimmy variation is giving you a stronger army. So again, right, taking a look here at the unit or technology researched, again, see here, right, we have bloodlines, right, going in after we queue up that third scout. So we have 4 scouts on the field in total. Taking a look at our HP, right, we expand that out. Okay, we're good there, right? Once we get bloodlines, right, we have 65 times 4 HP, right, which is 260. Now we're going to add 65 HP, right, every time we create another scout. This is going to do something really, really interesting for us, right? Now, taking a look at the time elapsed, right? Bloodlines takes 50 seconds to research. So once we get bloodlines, right, we're at 140 seconds. And if you'd kept making scouts at 120 seconds, you'd have 5 scouts, right? So again, this is why we're actually making this comparison, because one of the arguments would be that, well, just keep making scouts because you're going to have more units on the field, and that might be more valuable. And that's what we want to test here in this analysis. So the first thing we're going to take a look at, right, go ahead and look at our HP over time metric, right? And the big takeaway is that whereas in the 19 pop scout rush, right, this HP over time is continually going down. Once we get bloodlines, our hit points over time metric actually starts to improve. So we get more efficient in our army, and we're getting more value from our army. Basically, this would go up to about a ceiling of, since it's 65 HP over 30, right, about, like 2 point something, right? A little over 2, which is, we can see we're already kind of starting to get there after having only 14 scouts in the field. And one of the things we can do here is compare at what point in the game are we actually getting a better durability, right, in terms of how much time has passed than if we just kept making scouts. And so if we take a comparison here, right, this is at 1.86 and that's 1.88, so it's not going to be there. Now we're at 1.9 to 1.8, but the thing to keep in mind is that 170 seconds have elapsed in the Bloodlines Rush, but only 150 have elapsed in the, if you were to just keep making scouts. So we got to go down one more, 1.75, right? After, that's about 180 seconds. So there it is. There's the number right there. So when we're at 100 after 170 seconds have passed in the game, right, we have an efficiency that is higher. I'm just going to put this in yellow to mark that. That is now higher than if you were to make scouts continuously. So basically, the takeaway here is that once you make that extra scout after Bloodlines, your army is now more efficient, right? You have more value from your army than if you were to keep making scouts, and this is only going to keep going up over time. Okay, so now we can do some damage output calculations. Again, keep in mind we researched Bloodlines, so we're not going to be getting a damage increase there. So we're going to have a little bit less DPS out on the field overall, but the question is we have to look at it as a function of HP. So in a state of light combat, right, you can see that we're going to get a little bump here. The question is, when is this going to be better? So, right, once you get Bloodlines, we're at about almost 75, and still a little better for if you were to keep making scouts. So if we go down, right, one more, at 170 seconds, we're doing about 93.3, and 180, it's at 87. Perfect, right? Now we know exactly where to go. And this is really the same story here, right? This is the same story. So when we're at 170, right, we're on 170 seconds have passed, so under 3 minutes, right, we're basically we're able to get about 93 damage and change, and at 180 seconds, right, you're only getting about 87 damage, right? This is in light combat. Now if we go ahead and take a look here, and we're going to do the same thing, looking at heavy combat, right? So let's just start off. When we get Bloodlines, we're at 56.7. And that's at 140 seconds have passed. After 150 seconds have passed, okay, this is easy, right? And this is a really, really interesting takeaway here. And you can see, right, that in heavy combat, Bloodlines is giving us even more value. So the takeaway is that if we're fighting really heavily, right, the basic story goes is that once we research Bloodlines, we now, in terms of, again, a scenario where there's a lot of fighting going on with enemy armies, right, we now are able to put out more damage on the field than if we were to just keep making scouts. And of course, this is only going to keep going up over time, because that's the big takeaway here. All right, so the big takeaway from the very math-intensive section is that over time, scouts as a durable unit start to lose efficiency. And what Bloodlines does is Bloodlines actually improves the efficiency of your scouts quite dramatically. And the basic story is that in the Bloodlines Rush, once you've made about your 5th to 6th scout, right? Let's say it should be about the 5th scout, but you know, that's what the numbers tell us. Once you've made that extra scout after Bloodlines, you've essentially caught up to just making scouts continuously. And because your efficiency is declining over time with scouts that don't have Bloodlines, and Bloodlines is allowing your units to stay on the field longer to do more damage, the Jimmy variation, right, the Bloodlines Rush, is giving you much, much more value the more scouts that you even create. Now, you don't have to create a ton of scouts to get up there in value. Again, it's about at Scout 5, and in a situation where there's very heavy combat, basically once you research Bloodlines, you're good. So you don't have to invest all in scouts in order to reap the advantages from it. Now, the reason, though, I like the scout investment is the economic one. And that's because, like I mentioned earlier, Mongols don't have a great economy in the mid-game. And I like, once you have that really efficient army, go ahead, hitting your opponent with it. So you don't have to commit like crazy for Bloodlines to be worth it, but the more scouts you do make, the more efficiencies you're going to get. Now, there's some caveats and things to keep in mind, right? Again, always remember that if you're fighting, you're going to be trading units. I think that's an argument for the Bloodlines Rush because you're not going to trade units quite as much. But the other big aspect here to keep in mind, and a reason why you might actually prefer to not get Bloodlines and keep making scouts, is that if you're going to be raiding, you might want to split up your army. And being able to just have more units might allow you to split up your army into sort of 2 platoons, so to speak, to be able to raid and spread your opponent out. So I think that that's an advantage of continuous scout production over Bloodline. It's just sometimes it's helpful to be able to divide your army. And so if you're thinking about going for the Bloodlines Rush versus just keep making scouts, right? You know, I think that if you are not sure like how much you really want to commit, right? Your opponent might get walled up, that sort of thing. And if you're not sold on going melee units in the next age, I might not commit as much to a food economy, and you might want to just go for a traditional scout rush, get 3 or 4 without bloodlines in the field, just to kind of monitor your opponent. Don't put as much upfront investment in, and you'll give yourself a little bit more flexibility later to pivot to wood and gold intensive units, right? Now, I think you should go for the Bloodlines Rush and not delay it. If instead of focusing a bit more on raiding, where you might have to divide your army up and attack at sort of multiple vectors, if you're trying to fight your opponent's army, right? If maybe there's too many spears in the field that makes it too difficult to raid, maybe you can't get walled up, right, and you're being pressured, or if you want to go for sustained pressure, I really recommend going for the Bloodlines Rush. It's still pretty flexible in that, because you get a little bit on gold, you can keep that going, add in archers a bit easier if you want to in feudal age. You're going to have some gold, but you'll also probably have a lot of food. And so if you do go for the Bloodlines Rush, I think it flows a lot more naturally into staying on stable units, as opposed to, say, switching to a really heavy wood gold intensive unit like cavalry archers. I think crossbows is probably fine. They're not that expensive, but cavalry archers might be a bit much, I think, because you're going to have a lot of food and you want to spend that food on something, right? And so I think that 3 stables, right? Mix in light cav, knights, camels, steppe lancers, that kind of thing, I think is probably the more optimal play. Even though you can go for maybe a more cost-efficient unit like crossbows, I think that does work. So that is the build. Those are the thoughts on it. I think this is a super interesting build. I've had fun playing it in this. I think it's also an interesting build for team games. If you random into Mongols and you want to play the cav role, let's say your opponent randoms into a strong archer civ, you can kind of play it this way. Maybe try to end the game before Imperial Age, that kind of thing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the analysis if you stuck through that section. I encourage you to, if you have any thoughts on the build, definitely share them, let me know. Feel free to, I highly encourage you to go out, try this build out there in the ladder, and let me know what you think. If you've done the sort of classic Morley Rush, so to speak, right? How you think this compares, what you enjoy, and if you see Morley, right, let him know. I'll probably give him a quick shout and let him know about this video and this idea, and see what some of his thoughts are too, because he's really one of the gurus of the Mongols and Mongol steppe lancers now. So he's probably got some interesting thoughts. With that being said, guys, I'm Jimmy James 59, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys out there in the ladder. All right, peace.